Well, for more on this potential for the iPhone and also for Verizon, and also about the iPad, which is the launch is just a few days away, let's get to Gene Munster. He's an analyst with Piper Jaffray, considered by Bloomberg one of the most accurate forecasters and one of the most accurate analysts on Apple Computer. He's been recommending, by the way, the shares of this company since June 2004. And I just did a little calculation, Gene, from that time period. I think Apple shares are up by over 1,500% since then, so that was a pretty good call. It's still a pretty good call.
I guess, I appreciate that very much, but at the end of the day, it's what the stock's going to do over the next year that I'm more concerned about, and I think there's reason to stay optimistic, as hard as that is to believe. I think there's reason that the stock is going to go higher.
Right. I think you've got a price target of $284 for Apple. Okay, let's tackle this iPhone news first that came out in the Journal about possibly Verizon getting in on this as well. How big of a deal is that going to be for the iPhone?
Well, it would add about 15% to the overall iPhone unit numbers, so it's significant. It's enough to keep investors excited. In terms of total units, we're looking for 35 million units for this year. That would add about 3 million if that's the case. So that gives you a little bit of a sensitivity to what the impact is. More importantly is that this has been a big issue for investors in the U.S. as they've always wanted Verizon to get that phone. So it's probably more a psychological boost to Apple than anything.
Right, but is it going to ruin the relationship with AT&T, or does that matter?
Well, at the end of the day, AT&T's had a long-term exclusivity here. It's been 3 years, and some of these relationships are not meant to last forever, and so will it ruin the relationship? AT&T will still definitely want to sell the iPhone, and I think at the end of the day, AT&T really doesn't have much say in it. Apple has said they want to go to multi-carriers across the globe, and so Verizon would be one of those multi-carriers.
Okay, all right. Well, let's move on from that, though, Gene, because you're predicting, right, with the iPad, the early iPad sales, you expect between 150,000 to 200,000 this weekend of these sales, and 2.8 million by year-end of the iPads. And you're actually saying that this could be a conservative estimate. Why?
Well, basically, this has been kind of a slow boil here as far as people's enthusiasm around the iPad. And what we saw initially when it came out is people were a little bit skeptical. Apple has been a genius in terms of predicting, trying to predict demand. And at the end of the day is that they have underestimated already what the initial demand is for the iPad. And you can see that in the lead times on their site. And also, you can't reserve an iPad in the stores anymore. And so that's a sign that they've undershot what it's going to be. And I think that the true, real story here behind the iPad is a lot more about what the first weekend of sales is. And it's going to be more about what apps are developed for the iPad that are ultimately going to drive demand longer term. Right. In other words, we're not going to know the functionality until the future. Right.
You've said that actually it could take maybe up to a year for the iPad to gain some traction. But like you said, this weekend is going to be very key, right? And I'm told that you're going to be sending out your analysts to 6 different cities across the country to figure out, what is the impact, or I guess, what's the taste for this. Which cities are you targeting?
Well, it's the big ones. We have Minneapolis, we have one in Wisconsin, we have 2 stores in New York and a store in San Francisco. And so overall, the idea is we do this with every major product launch. We count lines. You can gauge, surprisingly, demand by just counting the number of lines. If there are 3 people stand outside a Fifth Avenue store, that's a problem. Typically, there's around 400 people that line up for an iPhone launch, and we can calibrate what that first weekend looks like just based on counting lines.
Interesting. Okay, well, we're going to want to hear what you found then over the weekend. Gene, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it. Gene Munster of Piper Jaffray.